Hey, welcome to our channel. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our latest content.
It began in a way you almost couldn't measure, a change so subtle. It was less a shift, and more an alteration in the air between us. Small things, gestures that, a year ago, would have dissolved into the normal rhythm of our lives, unnoticed, but now they carried weight, a significance that settled in the quiet corners of our home. Aria still had the same smile, the one that could light up a room, the one that had first captured me. Her words were still sweet. Her hugs still came at their scheduled times, one in the morning before work, one at night before sleep. But something inside the framework of it all had cracked, and I felt it like an invisible presence, a third person in our marriage. It's the kind of thing you can't explain to your friends over a beer. You can't point to it. You can't define it. You can only feel it, a cold draft in a room that should be warm. And as much as I wanted to dismiss it, blame it on stress, on her adjusting to the new job, a more methodical part of me began to watch, not with the desperation of a man drowning, but with the patience of one learning the currents. She had been hired as a paralegal at a prestigious downtown firm, Blackwood and Finch. The first few weeks were normal. Dinner conversations still flowed, filled with stories of demanding partners and arcane legal jargon. The goodnight kisses still happened, but it only took a month for the details to start fraying at the edges. Her clothes became sharper, more fitted. The soft sweaters and comfortable jeans were slowly replaced by tailored blazers and pencil skirts. Heels, once reserved for special occasions, now clicked against our hardwood floors every morning. Her laughter on the phone, once open and free, would now hush into silence the moment I entered the room. Her phone screen, once left carelessly on the coffee table, was now always face down. Soon, the evenings changed too. "I'm too tired to talk, Caleb," she'd say, her back already turned to me in bed. "Let's just sleep." The shows we used to watch together, now she'd seen them already. At lunch, her touch, once a spontaneous current that ran between us, now felt rehearsed, calculated. I have never been an insecure man, quite the opposite, but I am observant. And over the years, I had learned a fundamental truth about relationships. Betrayals rarely start with a kiss stolen in a dark corner. They start with distances, and a distance had opened between us, vast and silent. The suspicion began as a low hum, a background noise I tried to ignore. But soon, it grew into a restless thrumming in my chest. I am not the kind of man who confronts without evidence. I prefer precision over emotion. Instead of yelling, I observed. Instead of accusing, I analyzed. I started to notice the patterns, the small slips. One night, over a dinner that felt more like a business meeting, she mentioned that her boss, Damian Blackwood, was going through a complicated divorce. She said the employees were offering support, that the office was a tense environment. "He's really suffering," she commented, swirling the wine in her glass. And I found it strange, not because of the words themselves, but the way she spoke about him. The tone, it was too personal, too intimate. It was the tone you use for a friend you've known for years, not a boss you've worked for 2 months. It was the tone of someone who has already crossed a boundary. Days later, she came home wearing a new necklace. It was a delicate silver chain with a single, small sapphire. It was elegant, expensive. "It's beautiful," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "I know, right?" She beamed, touching it lightly. "I saw it during a flash sale online. A total impulse buy." But later that night, while she was in the shower, I saw her purse on the dresser. Sticking out of a side pocket was a small, dark blue velvet box. The logo, embossed in silver, was from a luxury jeweler downtown. The kind of place that doesn't do flash sales. I knew that model of necklace. I'd seen it in a magazine. It was expensive. Far too expensive for an impulse buy she wouldn't have mentioned before. If she had really bought it, she would have shown me the receipt, proud of the deal she got. She would have posted a picture of it. But no, it was hidden. This wasn't a purchase. It was a gift. And it wasn't from me. The hardest part was pretending. Pretending everything was normal. We still ate dinner together. We still watched movies, though a silence now sat between us on the couch. We still slept side by side in the same bed, a canyon of cold sheets separating us. But I no longer touched her with the same lightness. My mind was always working, analyzing, testing, calculating, and she, perhaps sensing my withdrawal, tried to compensate with exaggerated gestures. She'd send affectionate text messages in the middle of the day, filled with emojis I knew she never used. She'd buy my favorite takeout for no reason, But I saw through it all. These weren't acts of love. They were gestures of guilt. I didn't want gestures. I wanted the truth. And more than that, I wanted justice. That's when I decided to stop doubting my own intuition. I resolved to act. And as with everything in my life, I approached it methodically. I didn't search her phone. I didn't follow her. That was the path of emotion, of desperation. I chose precision. I hired a private detective, a discreet, efficient professional I found through a trusted legal contact, a man named Arthur Vance, who specialized in marital cases. He was older, with tired eyes that had seen everything. He promised me facts, not drama. It was exactly what I needed. In less than 2 weeks, Arthur contacted me. The moment I decided to step out of the role of observer and become an agent in my own life was exactly when I received the thick manila envelope from him. I was sitting at our kitchen table, the same table where Aria had told me about her boss's suffering. My hands trembled as I took it, but my gaze remained steady. Inside, there were no assumptions, only facts, dates, times, high-resolution photographs, clear images. There was no way to distort what was right in front of my eyes. Aria and Damian Blackwood, the senior partner at her firm. There they were, side by side at an exclusive restaurant I knew we couldn't afford. Him, with his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. Her, laughing, her head tilted back in a way I hadn't seen in months. There were more pictures, them entering a discreet boutique hotel downtown. Them leaving hours later, smiling, exchanging a lingering, affectionate kiss before parting ways. The images spoke for themselves. They were a silent, brutal testimony. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach, the air forced from my lungs. But instead of collapsing, a strange calm washed over me. There was no more room for doubt, no more agonizing over whether I was paranoid. The shadow that had been haunting me for months now had a face. It had a name. The betrayal was no longer a shadow. It was a fact. And now, I had a dilemma on my hands. I could simply walk away, cut my losses, file for divorce, disappear from her life. But something inside me, something primal and insistent, demanded more. It screamed for justice, not cruel revenge, not a public spectacle, but a worthy response. A way to end this story with the same intelligence I applied to everything else in my life. I didn't want to yell, or break things, or tarnish my own name with a messy, public scandal. I wanted every choice Aria and Damian had made to have a consequence, not just within the confines of my marriage, but outside of it, too. In that state of relentless lucidity, I made a decision that required a different kind of courage. I researched the name of Damian's wife, Eliza Blackwood. I knew little about her, only what Aria had mentioned in passing, that she was an artist and they were going through a tough time. It was easy to find her online. Her social media profile was public, filled with pictures of pottery and serene landscapes. And then I saw it, the most recent photo, posted just a week ago. It stopped me cold. It was a picture of Eliza, smiling softly at the camera. One hand was on her visibly pregnant belly, the other held a teacup, as if the world were at peace. The sight of it, it stalled my decision for hours. I stared at that photo, at this woman who had no idea her world was a carefully constructed lie. I wondered if it was my place to shatter it, if exposing everything at that moment would be fair, or simply cruel. I thought about it all night. I thought about the unborn child. But then I thought about myself. I had been hurt, too. I had been deceived, manipulated, and turned into an accessory in my own life. If I stayed silent, I wouldn't just be complicit in the lie against me. I would be allowing another person to continue living a lie. The decision to tell Eliza wasn't just about my own personal justice. It was about preventing another human being from living blindly, unaware of the ground crumbling beneath her feet. And above all, I needed to see it. I needed to witness the fall of their theater with my own eyes. That's how I arranged a meeting with Eliza Blackwood. I called Damian's office number, the main line. With a calm and steady voice, I asked to be transferred to his wife's personal assistant, feigning a business inquiry. Once connected, I was direct. "My name is Caleb Jensen," I said. "My wife, Aria, is an assistant to your husband. I have something important you need to see. It's about him." There was a silence on the other end of the line for a few long seconds. Then, a quiet, controlled voice said, "When and where?" We arranged to meet at a discreet cafe, far from the city center, at a time when few people would be around. I arrived early and chose a table in the back corner. I was tense, but determined. The envelope lay on the table beside me, a heavy, tangible weight of truth. When I saw her enter, I felt my stomach churn. She looked different from her social media pictures. More tired, more swollen, the weight of her pregnancy evident, but there was a dignity in the way she carried herself. In every careful step she took, she approached my table with a polite, questioning smile. "Caleb?" I stood up. "Eliza, thank you for coming." I hesitated for a moment, one last time, assessing whether this was still the right thing to do. She was a pregnant woman on the verge of bringing a new life into the world, a world I was about to detonate. But when I opened my mouth, the words came naturally, without anger, without exaggeration, just truths. I handed her the envelope. I explained what I had discovered, speaking clearly and respectfully. Eliza listened to everything in silence, her hands resting on her stomach. Her expression never changed. When I was finished, she opened the package. She looked at the images, one by one. I watched as her expression slowly transformed. There were no tears, no screams, but her eyes grew cold, her breathing became shallow. It was like watching a beautiful statue turn to ice. When she was done, she carefully placed the photos back in the envelope, her movements precise. She looked up at me, and her eyes were clear and hard as diamond. "Thank you for coming," she said simply. After that, she stood up, shook my hand firmly, and walked away with her head held high. And in that simple, dignified gesture, without a single harsh word, I knew I had done the right thing. A few days later, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Eliza had kicked Damien out of their house. She had filed for divorce, changed the planned name of the child she was about to have, and blocked all channels of communication. And there, in that news, I had my first real sense of justice. It didn't erase what I had lived through. It didn't lessen the pain. But it was the first sign that even in the face of betrayal, I could still control how the story ended. I realized there were two ways to end a lie. You could destroy it with fury, or dismantle it with intelligence. I had chosen the latter. When I returned home after meeting with Eliza, I sat at the dining table and, for the first time in weeks, faced Arya directly. She had prepared a simple meal, something she always did when she was trying to project an aura of normalcy. Her face showed fatigue, but her speech was still confident. Rehearsed, we began eating in silence, the only sound the clinking of our forks against the plates. Then, in a casual tone, I broke the quiet. "I met an interesting person today." Arya looked up, a polite smile fixed on her face. "Oh yeah? Who?" "Your boss's wife, Eliza." Her fork stopped midair. She tried to keep her expression neutral, but her hands betrayed a subtle tremor. In a fraction of a second, her eyes searched mine, hunting for any clue about what I knew. How much I knew. I observed everything. Every micro-expression, every hesitation. I no longer needed proof for myself. Now, I just wanted to see how far she would go to keep the lie alive. Arya's response was as predictable as I expected. "Really? What a coincidence. Where was that?" I smiled, a thin, humorless smile. And I answered her question with another question. "Does she know her husband is living in two worlds?" The sentence fell like a blade between us. She pretended not to understand, tried to change the subject, but I continued calmly. I laid out what I knew. I described dates, times, behaviors. I told her I had hired a detective, and then, the final blow. I already showed everything to Eliza. Arya dropped her fork. It clattered against her plate. Her hands rested on the table. Her shoulders slumped. For a few seconds, it seemed like she might break into tears. But what came next was not remorse. It was an explanation, an attempt at justification. "I got lost, Caleb. It was confusing. It wasn't supposed to happen." This kind of justification, it was common in stories of infidelity. People act as if the mistake came out of nowhere, as if they stumbled into an invisible trap set by fate. I knew this speech. It's a way to shift responsibility, to try to soften the impact of a deliberate choice. But I knew the truth. No one gets lost by accident. Cheating is a decision. It involves planning, omissions, and lies told with conviction. Arya hadn't gotten confused. She had made a choice, repeatedly. She knew where she was stepping. She knew what she was hiding. She knew she had crossed every conceivable line, and she chose to continue anyway. And worst of all, she did it while still coming home and sleeping next to me, breathing the same air, pretending that nothing was wrong. Even though I was overwhelmed by a deep, aching pain, I didn't let anger drive that conversation. I wanted her to understand, in no uncertain terms, what she had destroyed. The betrayal didn't start at the hotel with Damien, I said, my voice low and steady. It started much earlier. It was in the looks you avoided, in the curt responses, in the deleted messages, in the way you made me feel paranoid for noticing that something was wrong. The betrayal seeped in like a slow leak, and you, instead of stopping it, you let it spread until it ruined everything. Arya listened in silence, as if each word was a sentence being passed down. She tried to intervene with phrases like, "It was just a phase," or "I was going to end things with him." I cut her off with surgical coldness. You weren't going to end it. You just underestimated me. This part of the story doesn't have shouting or explosive scenes. This is where the concept of dignity comes into play. Because I had already moved past wanting to save her, or convince her to come back. What I wanted now was for her to face the truth without her masks, to feel the full weight of her own actions. I knew that, from that point on, any word from her would be an attempt to patch things up, and when someone tries to mend what they tore by choice, they rarely manage to restore the original fabric. Respect, for me, was like a crystal glass that had been cracked. It might still stand, but it would never again reflect the light in the same way. I ended the conversation with a dry tone, but without raising my voice. If you had confessed, I told her, if you had come to me from the beginning, maybe things could have been different. Regret, when it's sincere and immediate, can sometimes pave the way for rebuilding. But when it's delayed, and forced by exposure, it's nothing more than emotional survival. Arya swallowed hard. For the first time, she was at a loss for words. I stood up, picked up my plate, and placed it in the sink. Then I left the kitchen. No dramatic scene, no final speech, no promises or threats, just the certainty that from that moment on, our marriage was merely an expired contract. A few days before that final conversation, I had already taken the necessary steps. Without telling anyone, I had visited a few properties. I chose a modest apartment in a quiet neighborhood across town. I signed an indefinite rental agreement. I had already begun to pack, quietly, when she was at work. I took only the essentials, some clothes, my documents, my books, and the certainty that there was nothing left to salvage in that house. The divorce papers were already signed by me, sitting in my briefcase. The decision had been made even before the final confrontation, because I knew that even if Arya begged for forgiveness, some scars would never heal properly. Her infidelity wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional, and above all, it was planned with a cold calculation while I still believed we were building something together. That night, lying on the couch, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, and wondered at what exact point the woman I had married had ceased to exist. In her place was a stranger I no longer knew. I could hear Arya crying in our bedroom. Maybe she knew it would be our last night under the same roof. Maybe she hoped for a second chance, but she had already had plenty of them. The difference now was that I wouldn't let myself be fooled again by tears or empty promises. Early the next morning, before the sun had even begun to rise, I got up, I took a shower, and as a final, symbolic gesture, I put on the same shirt I wore the day I proposed to her, and then I left. No message. I just walked out the door and didn't look back. The new apartment was modest, but it was mine. It was a blank slate, no memories scattered on the walls, no ghost of betrayal lingering in the corners. It was a fresh start, from scratch. In that space, I could finally breathe again. I could sleep through the night. During the first few days, I avoided talking about it with friends or family. I avoided fueling resentment. I wanted to understand what was left of me after everything had been stripped away. I focused on work, rebuilt my routine, and kept my mind busy with anything that would distance me from the story I had left behind. But even in this new scenario, a part of me, the methodical observer, still watched in silence for the conclusion of the chapter I had closed. 2 days after I left, I received a notification on my phone from the security camera I had installed at our old house. I clicked on it. The image was clear. It was Arya, walking alone through the garage. Her hair was tied up carelessly, her face bare of makeup. She looked thinner. Her steps were slow, her gaze lost. She entered the house with a visible weariness, as if that space no longer belonged to her either. A few hours later, an old colleague sent me a text message. With some surprise in his tone, he told me that Arya had been fired. Officially, the reason was professional incompatibility, but I knew it was more than that. Damien Blackwood, the man she had risked her marriage for, had quickly severed all ties, like someone burning a bridge to avoid being caught in the fire. Arya had become a liability to his image, to his ongoing divorce settlement, and as often happens to those who enter unbalanced power dynamics, she was dismissed without ceremony. An inconvenient burden. The news hit me in an unexpected way, not with satisfaction, but with a grim sense of confirmation. Life, sometimes, has its own way of aligning the pieces. While she was dealing with the immediate, cascading consequences of her actions, I was already moving at a different pace. I was starting to regain control of my own narrative. I knew this moment would come. All it took was stepping out of the picture and letting the truth take its own relentless course. Arya had tried to hide, to manipulate, to lie. But reality is unforgiving when it arrives. And for her, it arrived like a door slamming shut without warning, pushing her into a world where no one would cover for her mistakes anymore. 6 months passed. 6 months of quiet rebuilding, of finding my own rhythm again. Then, one afternoon, while doing some quick shopping at a grocery store near my office, I spotted a familiar figure at the checkout line. It was Arya. She was wearing a faded blue uniform with the store's name embroidered on her shirt. Her hair was tied up in a simple ponytail, her face drawn, but without the air of someone still hoping to reverse the past. She was thinner, paler, but also more contained, like someone who had learned to be quiet in the face of life. She looked up and saw me. Our eyes met across the aisles of canned goods and cereal boxes. She didn't try to approach, nor did she look away in shame. She just held my gaze for a few long seconds, a silent acknowledgement of the point where everything had fallen apart. I didn't feel anger. There was no space for that anymore. What I felt, to my surprise, was a rare kind of peace, the certainty that moving forward had been the most correct and courageous act I could have taken. Not out of pride, but out of self-preservation, because sometimes, loving someone means accepting that they chose a path where you no longer fit, and allowing them to face the consequences of that path, without trying to save them, is part of that process. I learned that justice doesn't always come with a loud bang. Sometimes, it comes with silence and consequence. And when it arrives that way, no one needs to point fingers. The mistakes themselves do all the work. As I pushed my cart towards the exit, I thought about how life had led everything to this point. A betrayal, a rupture, and then, a rebirth. But what impressed me most was realizing how everything could have been different, with just one less choice made in secret. One truth spoken before the lie was allowed to grow. Arya had lost her job, her home, her husband. She now seemed to be surviving in a world she herself had created. I, on the other hand, had reclaimed my own identity, and that was the most elegant revenge of all. Moving forward while the other sinks under the weight of their own steps, without needing to retaliate with shouts, without needing to ruin anyone, just letting every action collect its exact price. Because in the end, what truly destroys a person isn't the punishment they receive from someone else. It's the reflection of the choices they themselves planted. And with that final thought, I stepped out into the afternoon sun, closing that chapter of my life not with a slamming door, but with the quiet tranquility of a man with a clean conscience and a clear path ahead. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next.